Today we read John's chapters 9 and 10, and we have another big I am statement from Jesus. The Gospels tell the greatest story ever told. Jesus Christ, God become man who suffered and died to save us. But despite being a cradle Catholic, I've never read them all the way through, and that changes now. Join me as we journey through the life of our Savior, his words, his miracles, and his sacrifice like never before. These are two pretty short chapters, and they start with Jesus healing a blind man. But again, the way that John writes is so different than we saw in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because John goes into great detail about everything that's happening in this story. He gives context, he gives background, he gives dialogue, he gives imagery. It's a way different writing style than I've grown used to while reading through the gospel. In fact, now that I'm realizing, this is the only thing talked about in chapter 9. There is no other sections. It is just Jesus healing the blind man. There's a blind beggar. He asks to be brought to Jesus. He's healed by Jesus when Jesus makes a mud kind of contraption, rubs it on his eyes, tells him to go wash off, and the man can see again. Of course, Jesus directly chooses to do this on the Sabbath again, so the Pharisees are all upset about the wrong things yet again. The Pharisees, they thought Jesus was a con man. I almost kind of respect, in a way, their diligence of making sure that this isn't like some magic trick. I mean, it is important as it gets to make sure that Jesus is who he says he is. So I understand their skepticism. They bring in the man's parents and they're like, was he really blind his whole life? They, of course, say he's of age. You can ask him. They were looking to persecute the parents too for lying, by the way. They believed that if this man was blind, it's because he was born in utter sin, either from his parents or from himself. It wasn't their place or anyone's place for that matter to contradict God's judgment on this man who was blind. They're thinking he was blind for a reason. Once, of course, that he confirms that he was blind, now he can see. And he answered them, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? So they're trying to prove it wrong. They can't do it. They're getting frustrated at it. They start throwing accusations at this guy. And then their ego and pride and just wickedness really comes out when they said, you were born in utter sin and you would teach us. And they cast him out. Man was blind his whole life. He just got healed. He's celebrating and joyous and happy about it. And the Pharisees are just filled by their own ego. They're obsessed with their own ego and they patronize him. They condescend him. They try to shove him off into a little hole that how dare this man try to teach them anything, because they're, of course, the superior ones in the situation. It's just so frustrating to read. And then Jesus says something that I think is very profound. Not only the literal, but also kind of metaphorical thing of Jesus opening this man's eyes. But when this man told Jesus, Lord, I believed, and he worshiped him, Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, are we also blind? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, we see, your guilt remains. It feels pretty specific that John calls out this miracle. We know of so many other miracles that Jesus performed, and John talks about some of them, but opening a blind man's eyes, it's not only literal in the sense that this happened, but the metaphorical logic of John including this also seems so obvious. Jesus came into the world to open the eyes so that people may see. And if we didn't feel like Jesus was making it clear enough up until this point, in chapter 10, he certainly does. And in chapter 10, we get another very profound and important I am statement from Jesus. I am the good shepherd. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. And Jesus continued and said, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. And after giving this teaching, Jesus says something that gets him nearly stoned to death. After making a bunch of statements in front of the Pharisees and teaching in front of the Pharisees and essentially claiming to be God, they get really up in arms about it. And he ends this by saying, my Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hands. I and the Father are one. So they picked up stones and started trying to stone him to death. And he's like, for which of my works do you stone me? And the Jews answered him, it is not for a good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. And Jesus even says, if I am not doing the works of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father. So they tried to stone him again, and thankfully he was able to escape. And that is where chapter 11 starts with the death of Lazarus, which is obviously going to be some big chapters. There are just no breaks, zero time off in John's gospel. Everything is just so dramatically important. And I am looking forward to continuing our journey through Holy Week next week. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next one.